If we could only talk about one character in Dragon Ball history that had such a monumental impact on the power scaling and balance of the franchise, it would have to be Broly. And in today's video, we will discuss how Broly defies the logic of Dragon Ball. Now, to start things off, we will first begin by talking about actual size, as size really does matter, and I don't mean it in that way. Because when you actually look at Broly physically and compare him directly to Trunks' Super Saiyan Grade 3 form, which actually was originally the design basis for how Broly got his design in the first place, we actually have a very interesting case. When we look at what Super Vegeta, which we would call by like his more anglicized dub name, we could actually see that Super Vegeta did not go into his theoretical Super Saiyan Grade 3 state and chose to fight in his Super Saiyan Grade 2 state because it didn't reduce his speed as much, something that his son Trunks obviously was too inexperienced to actually see himself. But when we actually look at Broly, specifically in the first movie, and even in Dragon Ball Super Broly, the incredible thing about him is that he's basically a significantly bigger version of what Trunks was in his Super Saiyan Grade 3 form. But because of his innate athleticism, if we were to translate Broly's abilities to sports, like a basketball player akin to someone like LeBron James, who's extremely big but could also move like a guard, we actually have a character in Broly who directly, immediately defies the laws of Dragon Ball, because he's so ridiculously powerful that he can move his body fast enough and he doesn't lose speed. So looking at it from that point of view, the first way that Broly defies the laws of Dragon Ball is by being able to move so fast at that size. Now, when we move on to our next point here, guys, we have to talk about the fact that Broly is also simply strong just because. And what exactly do we mean by being strong just because? When you actually do a direct power scaling look at Broly, and you use the first Broly to give more of an example, the first Broly in the original movie was so ridiculously powerful when you consider the fact that he literally was just living rogue with Paragus, and characters that have literally been training and getting multiple Zenkai boosts throughout their lives couldn't fight against one character who literally had no real competition throughout his life to push him into becoming a much stronger character. And as a result of that, and combined with the fact that our characters had significantly better sources of training as opposed to Broly just basically living his life with Paragus, there's no comparison. But when we look at Dragon Ball Super Broly, this gets even more insane, because when we look at the character of Broly, we can actually see that Broly specifically was living on a planet that was filled with bugs. And just training limited with Paragus and fighting with bugs made him strong enough to fight against two Super Saiyan Blues that just finished fighting in the Tournament Power and force them into having to fuse against him. Now this is actually very interesting because this also directly parallels the character of Kale. When we look at the character of Kefla specifically, the primary source of her power really comes with Kale basically boosting Caulifla, as Kefla is basically just Caulifla with Kale's power boost. And when we look at this even more deeply, the interesting thing about looking at Kefla specifically is that her power made a lot more sense narratively when we actually look at the manga, where she became such an uncontrollable menace that Kale basically had to fuse with Caulifla in order to basically make her a more sentient character in the Tournament of Power, because Kale was completely losing her mind, which ultimately led to the battle that Kefla eventually had against Gohan. But the interesting thing is that when we look at this from the anime adaptation, because Kale was able to control herself a lot more, it kind of took away that essence. And how does all of this relate back to Broly? Well, all of this basically makes you wonder how many villains he could defeat in multiple timelines when you consider the fact that Broly has basically been fighting at a handicap. Whereas with Kale, specifically in the anime, she was able to basically fight directly with her controlled state as she eventually figured it out, but Broly has never been able to control himself. So Broly could theoretically do way more than what we actually see, but we never actually got a chance to. Now, the other thing about Broly, which is more something that we saw with the original Broly in the original Broly movie, is that his power constantly just grows for absolutely no reason. Now, when you actually think about it like this, I mean, this is very different from other characters that have to get Zenkai boosts or train or go through a variety of different things to increase their power. And when you consider the fact that Saiyans don't really age much in their physical prime and don't age until much later on, this definitely gives Broly a huge advantage. And this obviously made a lot more sense in the first movie, where the characters that Broly eventually fought against were around the time period of the Cell games. But when we look at it in Dragon Ball Super Broly, if his power constantly just grew on its own, I mean, that would just go to show how insane Broly actually is when you consider that the characters that he fought in Dragon Ball Super Broly are significantly higher than what the original Broly fought. Now, when we actually look at Vampa specifically, it's actually pretty insane to think about the fact that Paragus is literally the primary source of how Broly trained and fought at any point at all. Because when we directly look at Planet Vampa specifically, the thing about it is that you would reach a point when you've lived on a planet for so long that at a particular point the bugs won't really give you much experience points in terms of actual fighting value. Kind of think about it like playing a game like RuneScape or so on and so forth. If you keep fighting against cows or rock crabs at a particular level, it's going to get a lot harder to continuously level up, considering the fact that as you get stronger, you need to face against stronger characters. And considering the fact that Broly was literally spending his life limited on a planet like Vampa, the harsh environment would definitely make him strong in the initial stages, but the fact that Broly was able to get so much stronger after that all on his own simply defies the logic of Dragon Ball. But here's the even crazier thing about fighting on planet Vampa. The thing is that if he's on a planet with such weak creatures compared to himself, he will never ever get the chance to actually have proper Zenkai boost to multiply his power more. And let's not take this as a light statement. The Namek arc was definitely notorious for powering up characters in the blink of an eye, as Toriyama had to get creative in powering up his characters without the ability to have time to train. And when you factor in all of the Zenkai boosts that the main Saiyans have had throughout Dragon Ball history, if you have Broly who never would really be pushed to the brink of death, then that's one huge disadvantage that he has compared to our peers, but yet he's so powerful anyways. Now we also have to mention a direct comparison between Broly and Gohan. When we actually look at Gohan specifically, the thing about him is that he actually needs rage to bring out his abilities. And we could all agree that Gohan is definitely one of the greatest prodigies in Dragon Ball history, outside of Kale and Broly of course. But the thing is that Gohan still needs to train, whereas when you look at a character like Kale, and even more specifically Broly, they don't really need any of this training that Gohan does. And the crazy thing about Gohan is that we talk about how his potential just gets him out of all of these crazy situations, but we totally forget about the times where it actually doesn't. You see, when you look at a particular case like future Gohan, who trained way more than the present Gohan up until a particular point of his life, obviously future Gohan was doing much more limited training, but he was trying and he was never able to reach the heights that he had. Gohan always needed assistance in some type of way. And then when we look at Gohan in Resurrection of F, he had multiple points, especially when Piccolo died, where his great potential could have came out and he should have wiped out Frieza, but it just simply never happened. So the fact that Gohan has showed limitations, and even against fighting Super Buu, that his potential does not always get him over the hump. But when you compare that to a character like Broly, he pushes our characters to the actual brink, and that actually shows that his potential and his fighting abilities are just so great that he makes one of the greatest prodigies in Dragon Ball simply look like a joke. Now ultimately, one of the craziest things about Broly overall is that Broly is so ridiculously powerful that it's kind of unfair. Now, one of the things about making this completely unfair is the fact that at least the original Broly died, so you can just kind of write him off into the Dragon Ball story and say, hey, he died, that was the end of him. But because Broly is a mainstay in Dragon Ball Super and is officially like a part of Universe 7's clique, that just goes to show us that we haven't even seen Broly scratch the surface of what he's truly capable of. And this now creates a bigger problem for the writers. How are the writers of Dragon Ball going to write his character in a way where it actually makes logical sense to sort of cap what he's able to do? Because when you consider what he was able to do with so many different limitations, it's kind of hard to keep him below Goku and Vegeta and even Gohan when you consider what he is able to do naturally. So as a result of this, if Broly is truly a main character, he will be a bigger problem for any enemy of Universe 7, more than Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan would be if the writers of Dragon Ball were honest. And of course, this also includes Piccolo, who got his 2 power boosts by using the power of the Dragon Balls. So, with Broly eventually being an ally of Universe 7, and with the potential for Broly to train and figure out how to control his abilities, if he was able to do it similar to a character like Kale, then the scary truth is how much more would Broly truly be able to break and defy the logic of Dragon Ball.